Good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful day for this ceremony. We're going to start off. The first song became the theme song of the 16th Regiment, which General Wozenski was in charge of, and it's from a show called New York, New York, years ago, and it's called. The song is the street called "The Streets of New York." So that's what we would like to do for you first today, all right? And then after we do that, I'd like to introduce the ladies of the ensemble, and here we go.
East side, west side, all around the town, and the tots sang ring a rosy, London Bridge is falling down. Boys and girls together, me and Mammy O'Rourke, tripped the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York. Down in front of Casey's old brown wooden stoop, on a summer's evening, there performed a merry group. Boys and girls together, we would sing and waltz, while Tony played the organ on the sidewalks of New York. East side, west side, all around the town, and the tots sang ring a rosy, London Bridge is falling down. Boys and girls together, me and Mammy O'Rourke, tripped the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York.
I'd like you all to please stand now as we have the color guard post the colors. I'd like to have Bob Barnett, who was General Wozenski's personal driver, now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Bob?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty with justice for all.
That's it. Let us all join together now in singing the Star-Spangled Banner.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light how proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the
Okay, everybody can be seated. It is now my pleasure to introduce Deacon Stan Petrowski, who will do the invocation. Stan?
Thank you, Tom. Uncover, please. Dear Almighty God, as we gather today in the city of Bristol to dedicate this monument to General Edward F. Wozenski, we say thank you for his valiant service to our nation. We say thank you for his military leadership. We say thank you for all that he has given each one of us so that we may enjoy the freedoms we know today. And we pray also that his memory and legacy will live in our hearts forever, and we ask this in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Stan. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today as we remember Bristol's most decorated World War II soldier, Brigadier General Edward Wozenski. I'm Tom Laporte, and before we begin our program, I would like to introduce my fellow committee members who have worked together for over the past 2 years to bring today's program into a reality. Bob Barnett, our committee chairman. Bob, stand. Ron Burgoyne, Sheila Bousquet, Carol Dennehy, Vice President of the Memorial Military Museum, Rachel Dion, Mary Houle, niece of General Wozenski, Bob Montgomery, our city historian, Dave Peplow, Scott Rosato, city councilman, Mike Thomas, the Memorial Military Museum president, and alphabetically last, but certainly not least, Art Ward, former mayor of Bristol. At this point, I would like to ask Scott Rosato to join me at the podium. Scott? On behalf of your fellow committee members, Scott, we wish to thank you for going the extra mile in bringing the monument to a reality. You turned problems into solutions and made difficult tasks simple. From all of us, Scott, thank you for a job well done. Among our guests today is Bristol's Mayor, Ellen Sappo Sasser, who will speak to us later in the program. In the meantime, I would like to have Scott Rosato introduce our local and state officials who have joined us today for this dedication. Scott?
Thank you, Tom. At this point, I'd like to recognize our Councilman Dave Perleski. If you can stand, please. Councilman Peter Kelly. Councilwoman Mary Fortier. And our state rep, Kara Pavlak D'Amato. I'd also like to recognize our police chief. Police. It doesn't like that word, I guess. Police Chief Ryan Gold. Thank you.
At this point, please welcome Chris Couture, Commander of Bristol's American Legion Post Number 2. Chris?
Thank you for having me. Just want to thank everybody for being here. Everybody who made this happen. It's going to be a beautiful monument. You're going to love it. That's about it. Thank you.
General Wozenski's family will now read the inscription on the bronze plaque that will become part of the monument. In addition, we also have a memorial wreath that will be placed at the base of the monument.
General Captain of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, from North Africa through Sicily, Normandy, northern France, Rhineland, Ardennes, Central Europe. As a young captain, he played a major role in creating the coveted combat infantryman's badge. Though he would receive numerous decorations, including a bronze star with oak leaf cluster, a silver star with oak leaf cluster. It was that badge that meant the most to his soldier soul. He was awarded a First Distinguished Service Cross for his heroic actions and calm, determined leadership that inspired his company to hold a vital hill in Sicily that outnumbered and surrounded by enemy tanks. Captain Wozenski's valor earned him the Second Distinguished Service Cross for actions on D-Day, June of 1944. Boldly organized Spanish troops on Omaha Beach, led them through the shotgun fire and fortified bridge where he drew enemy fire to himself until his men reached safe positions to destroy the stronghold. After World War II, he served with the Connecticut Army National Guard, attaining the ranks of Brigadier General and Commander. Brigadier General Wozenski served God, country, family, and community with faithfulness, distinction, and honor.
Bob Barnett will now unveil the new street sign proclaiming this portion of East Street to now be known as Wozenski Way. Bob? It is now my pleasure to introduce Cynthia Frizzell, the daughter of General Wozenski. Cynthia?
Hope you can hear me. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, beloved family and friends, thank you so much for attending this ceremony for my father, Edward Wozenski. I know many of you have come from out of town, out of state, and my family really appreciates the effort you have made to join us here. I'd like to give a special thank you to my cousins, relatives, and friends who've taken time to join us in Bristol today. Out of our original immediate family of 6, only 3 remain. Joining me today are my 2 sisters, Marion Weaver and Frances Wozenski. Missing are our wonderful father, Edward, our cherished mother, Regina Wozenski, and our beloved eldest sister, Janet Wozenski. My father, Edward, was a first-generation American, the son of an Austrian mother and a Polish father who immigrated through Ellis Island, not speaking a word of English. He could speak Polish and German and learn English in kindergarten. He deeply appreciated the struggles of his parents, new immigrants in a new country, struggling to raise 6 children in a new culture. My father was born in Bristol, lived his life in Bristol, and died in Bristol. He was a true son of the city and believed in hard work and giving back to the community. He worked at 2 jobs his entire life and still found time to volunteer for school activities, PTA, local organizations, and politics. Apart from the U.S. Army, he was also committed to the National Guard and the state of Connecticut. From a daughter's point of view, I can say he instilled in us a strong work ethic, respect for the military, and the democratic principles upon which the country was founded. My father always said he felt like a very lucky soldier. He survived continuous combat and infantry service during some of World War II's most challenging battles and engagements. Edward fought in the famous Big Red 1 Division and had inspirational commanding officers such as Generals Omar Bradley and George Patton. He was proud of his division and the officers he served under. He took great pride and responsibility for the soldiers under his command. He trained combat troops in England and was also active in the campaigns in North Africa. He was with General Patton when they invaded Sicily. His 16th Infantry Battalion landed on Omaha Beach in the Normandy invasion, and despite terrible losses, helped secure a foothold for the Allies. He fought in Germany and France and helped liberate Paris when his division marched down the Champs-Élysées. The men in the Big Red 1 Division experienced 5 years of sustained combat fighting as they struggled to survive and gain victories for the Allies. The bonds and friendships they formed during those 5 years were intense, and they remained close, loyal friends for the rest of their lives. Edward Wozenski loved his men, the Army, and defending democracy. My parents attended the 25th anniversary of the Normandy invasion in the 1970s. I remember my mother's reaction to seeing the huge steep cliffs in Normandy and saying, how could anyone have survived scaling those walls while being shot at the entire time? It seemed impossible. I know she would be very pleased today to have her husband honored by the city he devoted his life to. Edward Wozenski was a very down-to-earth person. He respected hardworking people from anywhere in any profession. He taught us to be honest and not be afraid to give an opinion or stand up for what you believe in. He had a good sense of humor and a keen sense of justice. He believed in helping people help themselves. He liked to travel and tell stories. When all else failed and we couldn't solve a problem, he would often say, use your God-given common sense. He was the patriarch of a large extended family that included his wife, 4 daughters, sons-in-law, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, 5 brothers and sisters, their wives and husbands, plus nieces and nephews who lived all over the country and the world. Edward had a close relationship with his brothers, Joseph and Frederick, and his sisters, Helen, Anna, and Eleanor. I know that they would be very touched at this recognition of the brother they knew, admired, and loved. Like all adult children who feel they lost a parent decades too soon, we really miss him. We think of all the births, graduations, marriages, and life events he has missed. We miss being able to talk to him about world events and all the comings and goings in our lives. In conclusion, I think my father would have been surprised and delighted to see all the people here today, and I think he would be very proud to leave his mark in Bristol, Connecticut. I would like to especially thank my cousin Mary, Carol Dennehy and the committee, and all the others who have made this ceremony a labor of love and respect for my father, Edward Wozenski. Thank you.
We will now have a musical interlude.
He was a famous trumpet man from old Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was the top man of his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, although in Reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. They made him play before his uncle said. He really brought him down because he couldn't jam. The captain seemed to understand. Because the next in a camp went out and drafted a band. And now the company jumps when he plays Reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He goes at 8 to the bar. In boogie rhythm, he can't blow a note unless he makes the guitarist playing with him. He makes the company jump when he plays Reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. And when he plays boogie woogie bugle, he's as busy as a buzzing bee. And when he plays, he makes the company jump and 8 to the bar. He is the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He goes at 8 to the bar. He can't play a note unless the basic guitarist playing with him. He makes the company jump when he plays Reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. Do do liada do liada do do wee. Don't pay, don't pay, don't pay, don't. He waits his horse to sleep with boogie every night and wakes them at the stably in the morning light. They clap their hands and set their feet because they know how it plays when someone gives him a beat. He really breaks it up when he plays Reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. A toot, a toot, a toot, a toot. He moves at 8 to the bar. Boogie rhythm, he can't play a note unless the basic guitar is playing with him. And then the company jumps when he plays Reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. Oh yeah.
Mike is going to have another rendition. Mike?
When all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all around. smelled like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I?
It is my pleasure now to introduce Bristol's Mayor, Ellen Sappo Sasser. Ellen?
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the City Council, it is my pleasure to be standing here after 2 years of planning and looking forward to this event. So kudos to the committee and everyone who has brought us here. The Memorial Boulevard holds a special place in the hearts of most people from Bristol and those who no longer call Bristol home but have the connection back to this community. So to the Wozenski family, welcome back for those of you who may not have been here, and we're very thrilled to share this day with you. I was not fortunate enough to meet General Wozenski, but I feel often that I had, because there are so many stories about him. And oftentimes on a Saturday afternoon at the Historical Society, while I was doing some of my work, I had the pleasure of having Jack Dennehy tending to the Memorial Military Museum, oftentimes with his beloved Red Sox on the radio, where he would tell me all the stories and all of the words of the people that had come before him and who made the Memorial Military Museum what it is. That museum, the Historical Society, this physical boulevard represent to us the generations of soldiers, the veterans, and everyone who is committed to the way of democracy, and we remember them here. The monuments tell the stories, they're their voices, and it's our way of remembering them. Here today on the boulevard, for those of you who may not know, General Wozenski grew up on South Mountain, right above us. He spent time here at the high school, and he was an employee of Wallace Barnes. And today we have Tom Barnes with us, the CEO and chairman of the board of the Barnes Group, acknowledging the work of that employee during that time. But most importantly, the connection to Wallace Barnes is the fact that when he returned 5 years away from his job, they credited him all of those years of employment. That's exactly what Bristol stands for, the community connections and everything that wraps itself around how you define yourself as a city. This Memorial Boulevard, with this new monument, its new street name, is just one way that we as a community remember. And it is actually probably the nexus of most of the city departments that do work here. You've met the police chief, and his staff is here today. The city council spend a lot of time on our committees working on issues related to the boulevard. We also have the Parks Department represented today, who were up early to make sure that this was in fantastic condition. And we also have with us our Director of Public Works, Ray Wozenski, in the back, because we have about 4 exciting projects happening on the boulevard, including behind me, bridge work and the bridge work that is happening there, some infrastructure, sidewalks, and enhancements all along the boulevard. It is also our gateway to downtown, and if you look behind me, you'll see the Memorial Boulevard School, formerly the Bristol High School, but will now soon be an arts magnet school and home to our renovated theater, which will be a catalyst for downtown. The Board of Education will now have a seat on the boulevard, which they always use as outdoor classrooms for Veterans Day in conjunction with our Veterans Council. So really, this is the center of Bristol, and it is with that in mind that we dedicate this monument, this street, and remember someone who is going to be worthy of all of that in remembrance of all the veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Scott Rosato will now read a proclamation from the state of Connecticut. Scott?
The Connecticut General Assembly presents an official citation. This was introduced by Representative Whit Betts, 78th District, Representative Kira Pavlik D'Amato, 77th District, Representative Christopher Ziogas, 79th District, Senator Henry Martin, 31st District. Be it hereby known to all that the Connecticut General Assembly hereby offers its sincerest congratulations to Brigadier General Edward F. Wozenski in recognition of your dedicated service to your country as a member of the armed forces, your extraordinary bravery, patriotism, and love of country and state are in line with the core values of the military and an inspiration to all Americans. The state of Connecticut and the United States of America holds a debt of gratitude for your service. We thank you for your sacrifice to our country. The entire membership extends its very best wishes on this memorial occasion and expresses the hope for continued success. Given this day of September 2021, given this 25th day of September 2021 at the state capitol, Hartford, Connecticut, by President Pro Tempore Martin M. Looney, Speaker of the House Matt Ritter, Secretary of the State Denise Merrill. I hereby present the proclamation.
Thank you, Scott. We are indeed fortunate in having with us today Colonel Panett of the 169th Infantry Regiment. Please welcome the Colonel. Colonel?
Thank you. I'm one of the few individuals that had the pleasure of serving with General Wozenski. My first encounter took place at Fort Drum, New York in 1970. I was a young second lieutenant in B Company, 1st Battalion, 169th Infantry, and I was running an M79 grenade launcher range, live fire. Grenade launcher was a breech-loaded, single shot, looked like a shotgun, but it fired off a 40 millimeter grenade and could cause some serious damage to the enemy. It was running, I thought, very smoothly, and all of a sudden I see a Jeep pull up with the 1-star placard on it, and it was General Wozenski. I had never met him. He observed what we were doing for a few minutes, and then he came up, and I greeted him and told him who I was, and he says, Lieutenant, he says, you're running a pretty good range here, and I felt really good about that. But then he said, you know, how would your soldiers carry the ammunition in combat? And I looked at him and I said, well, they would be carrying them on their person in a bandolier, probably about 20 or 30 rounds. But what we were doing is that for safety reasons, we had an ammo control point. We had a NCO or an assistant with each gunner, and they would take one round at a time and bring it up to the firing line and then shoot the round off, and the assistant gunner would have to go back to the ammo point, get another round, and shoot the ammunition off. And the general looked at me and he said, you know, Lieutenant, that's not how they would do it in combat. He says, what you ought to be doing is issuing each of your soldiers the standard load, have them go up to the firing line. That way there they can practice taking these rounds out of their pouches and putting them in the weapon and firing them. And at that point, you know, I looked at him and I said, boy, this man has got his stuff together when it comes to, you know, training soldiers. He also said to me, and I kept this throughout my military career, he says, when you train, you have to be safe, but when you want to train in simulated combat conditions. Whatever you do, it has to be realistic. And I carried that for the rest of my life in the infantry myself. The other thing he told me, which really stuck out in my mind, he says, make sure your men know their individual weapons inside and out, because someday that may save their life. And he was an expert on just about every infantry weapon, especially during World War II. It was my first encounter with him. I didn't really have much knowledge about who he was or what his background was, and this is back in 1970. 20 years later, I was fortunate enough to be assigned to a committee that came up with the plaques that are now, they were dedicated to the Bristol Armory, but they're now in the Memorial Museum. But these three plaques had his a brief history of him, and then the inscription of both of his Distinguished Service Crosses. There were 10 senior officers on this committee, and I was the junior guy that was assigned to be a liaison officer for the Adjutant General at the time. And these 10 individuals had served with General Wozenski in Germany. He commanded the 169th Infantry Regiment during the Korean War in Germany. And I learned so much about the general from these 10 officers that I was not aware of his wartime service. I was overwhelmed at the man and his combat experience, and I'm so happy to see him being recognized here today, and I congratulate the committee and the city of Bristol for doing this. You know, some things that these old soldiers talked about the general, and his daughter Cynthia mentioned some of them, but his leadership, they talked about that extensively, about what a leader this man was, how much integrity he had, how he treated his soldiers with respect. He was extremely fair officers when dealing with his subordinates. His patriotism was second to none. He was one of the most courageous individuals that anybody would ever want to meet. His love for his family and God were strong. And the two main things is that his pride of service, his war service were impeccable. And I was just lucky enough to have the privilege of serving with them and also being on that committee. And what you folks are doing here today is commendable, and thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Colonel. Before I forget, everybody should smile. We're having Nutmeg TV. They're recording the whole program. So make sure when you go home tonight, turn on your TV and you'll see yourself on your TV set. Bob Montgomery, historian for the city of Bristol, will now relate some of the general's activities in the Sicily campaign. Bob?
Thank you, Tom. Wozenski was in the Yukon ROTC Reserve as an officer, and he was federalized in 1941. During his career, he made 3 amphibious landings. If you've seen these movies on TV, it's really quite interesting, very scary, very dangerous. And he put himself in front of a enemy fire, so often, so many times. He had a little luck, I believe, on his side, well deserved. At Sicily, when he was in Sicily, his commander was wounded, and Wozenski took over. He was a captain at the time. With 6 officers and 45 men, he tried to hold on to Hill 41, which was an important location for their move through Italy. Unfortunately, after some days of fighting and taking over the hill, German tanks overran and took the hill back. Well, Wozenski wasn't going to put up with this. As an individual, he gets up, he jumps in a tank and charges up the hill himself. He takes out 2 tanks, one from the rear right after it went over his foxhole he was in. And again, I can't imagine. You got the tank coming over you, and he's got the wherewithal to take it out. And he continually moved around and kept his men in action and set a good example for him. Time magazine had his name in the paper after this. And here's a quote from the Time magazine. "Upon him for a tense while, the fate of the U.S. invasion rested." Now those are key words. He really did something very important, which allowed our troops to proceed through Italy. He had saved the entire right flank, and the American force was able to move into D'Acosta and go forward. He was presented his first citation, and I'm going to read it here. "The President of the United States of America, authorized by the Act of Congress, July 9, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Service Cross to Captain, (Infantry) Edward F. Wozenski, United States Army, for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy while serving as commanding officer. Company G, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division." And this was in action against enemy on 11 July 1943 in the Gela di Summa section of Sicily. Captain Wozenski, with about 50 men and officers, was holding a vital hill when the enemy counterattacked with about 10 tanks. Can you imagine that? 10 tanks coming at you, and you only have one bazooka. And approximately a battalion of infantry, greatly outnumbered. The tanks surrendered the hill, firing at point blank range when Captain Wozenski seized a rocket gun, and while constantly exposed to tank, artillery, machine gun, small arms fire, continued to move from location to location, firing on the tanks. Captain Wozenski's superbly heroic, calm, determined conduct inspired his men to resist in an apparently hopeless situation and was a prime factor in the defeat of the enemy's counterattack. His gallant leadership, personal bravery, and zealous devotion to duty exemplify the highest traditions of the military force of the United States and reflect great credit upon himself, the 1st Infantry Division, and the United States Army.
Thank you, Bob. Carol Dennehy, Vice President of the Memorial Military Museum, will now give us insight into the D-Day invasion and the activities at Omaha Beach. Carol?
Thank you, Tom. Well, a few weeks ago, I rewatched the movie Saving Private Ryan, specifically for the opening scenes. We all remember those traumatic images the overpowering noise that seemed to go on forever, the shocking sea of blood washing bodies, piling up like logs, thousands of men caught in catastrophic crossfire, desperately seeking cover behind hedgehogs, moving slowly, slowly up the hellish beach. They were targets. Targets who pushed forward to the goal, the 100-foot high bluffs. Atop the bluffs, the targets would become hunters. For those of us who watched the movie scenes, it lasted 26 excruciating minutes. For those who were there to begin the Battle of Normandy, they started 2 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days before its conclusion. However, final victory in Western Europe depended on only one day, June 6, 1944, D-Day. As German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel said when he spoke about the inevitable invasion of Western Europe by the Allies, the first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. The fate of Germany depends on the outcome, the Allies too. For them, it will be the longest day. But a half a dozen or more authors have written eloquently about that day and included 28-year-old Captain Edward Wozenski. I will rely on their words, but better yet, I can share part of his story on that day through his own words. On the morning of that day, the world's greatest armada, 5,000 ships carrying 150,000 men plus equipment, crossed the English Channel for an amphibious assault on 5 separate sectors of the Francis coastline. The beach, codenamed Omaha, would prove to be the deadliest of all. More than 34,000 U.S. soldiers land. At the end of the day, 2,500 will be dead or wounded. From Alex Kershaw's book, Sand-Stained Red. Aboard the USS Samuel Chase, Captain Edward Wozenski and Lieutenant John Spaulding were hunched over a rubber carpet, examining a mock-up of the Normandy defenses, complete with miniature houses and trees laid out in loving detail, all based on the most recent reconnaissance photos. Of most interest was Easy Red, one of 8 landing sectors on the 5-mile-long Omaha beach. There was just one exit, a draw, a gully, leading through the 100-foot bluffs. It was codenamed E1 and was heavily defended by 2 German strongholds. Captain Wozenski was a commander of E Company, 2nd Battalion, 16th Regiment, 1st Division, and of the 3 seaborne divisions landing on that day, it was the only one that had been in combat. Thankfully, E Company had its share of combat veterans, and they were lucky to be commanded by Captain Edward Wozenski, a big bear of a man from Connecticut. Having previously led G Company in combat in North Africa and Sicily, Wozenski was highly respected, regarded as the calmest officer in combat in the entire 16th Regiment. His words carried weight. From experience, he knew only too well. It didn't matter how well planned the invasion was. There would inevitably be chaos and confusion. Things were bound to go wrong. The best way for those in the first wave to survive was to stay on their feet, keep going, attack, and kill the enemy. So what went wrong for E Company of the 16th Regiment? First, the landing craft veered too far east of the landing zone, putting them in a terribly killing zone from Hitler's still Atlantic wall, intact a massive line of fortifications that had taken Germany years and millions of Reichsmarks to build. Wozenski, quote, "Coming in on the landing craft, we saw the ships take some shore gunfire. We saw the rocket ships taking some evasive action, and someone panicked and pulled a switch. And we saw 9,000 rockets, the most beautiful display you ever saw in your life. And not one rocket came within a half a mile of that beach." What went wrong? No naval bombardment before or during the first wave touched the Atlantic wall. What went wrong with the Air Force? Wozenski asked, quote, "Why didn't we get our 186 tons of bombs dive bombing on exit E1? To God, I swear to God, I didn't even see so much as a hand grenade crater on the beach." The prime lesson: do not give undue weight to the actual effects of supporting weapons. I said to my men, have faith in what you have in your hands, and thank God we did. Captain Wozenski describing coming in on the Higgins boats and landing. "The ramp as a boat grounded, machine gun fire was rattling against the ramp as a boat grounded. The boats hurriedly emptied, the men jumping into water shoulder high under intense machine gun and anti-tank fire. No sooner was the last man out than the boat received 2 direct hits and blew up. Now all the men could be seen wading ashore into a field of intense fire from machine guns, rifles, anti-tank guns, and mortars. It was a heavy sea, cross-current, and the heavy load they were made to carry. It was a slow march with absolutely no cover. Many fell left and right. A few men hit underwater mines and were blown out of the sea. Others staggered onto the obstacle-covered beach, yet completely exposed beach, men falling on all sides. But the survivors moved forward, up to a pile of shale that offered momentary protection against the murderous fire of the close-in enemy guns, but the mortars were still raising hell. The beach was bloody awful. We landed per the Navy's request at low water, and that meant approximately 400 yards of struggle over the sand. So what else had gone wrong? American reconnaissance photos had shown a long line of high stakes on the beach, angled seaward, topped by teller mines that would be triggered off by the landing craft coming in on high tide, hence the decision to land at low tide. Wozenski. He faced 400 yards covered with treacherous barbed wire coils, covered with landmines buried under the sand. He said to cross 400 yards of low water beach and climb a formidable bluff to the enemy's main defenses was short of murder. But they were trained for it, and that would make all the difference. Wozenski. Personally, I was just pinned down. Everyone around me was being shot. You'd stick up your head and you'd get hosed down. My executive officer, I'm talking to him, and he had one drilled right through his forehead, Lieutenant Duckworth. And I'm praying for smoke to act as nightfall so we could get up through this wire. Finally, we made a lateral move. Because of the battle smoke that began to cover the area, and through all of this, on the flank, I saw a yellow smoke flare. And I had said to my men, if all else fails, the first son of a gun to get on top of that bluff, send up a smoke flare. So, I try to assemble as many people as I can and make a move up there, because somebody got up there, and I knew he couldn't get up from where I was. So I remember taking my trench knife and pressing it in people's back to see if they were alive. If they were alive, I'd kick them and roll them over and say, let's go. And I picked up a half a dozen people this way, and we would move on down. But I didn't realize that terror could be so great that a man, a live man, would not turn around to see who was sticking a knife in him. Then later, it dawned on me. Now I could be in that boat, but at that particular moment, I was standing. We assembled about a dozen men, and then I worked my way up along with 6 or maybe 10 men, and I run into the sergeant who had set up the smoke flare. One of my platoon sergeants, Sergeant Strychek, the greatest unsung hero of World War II, because he might have been the first one off that beach. I'm climbing the bluff, and I see Strychek coming down because he's happy. He's got a grin on his face. He's glad to see me. All of a sudden, I looked at him as he came down, and I said, "My God, what the hell are you doing?" As he puts his foot on a teller mine right in front of my nose. I said, "What? How stupid can you be?" He looks at me and says, "Don't let it worry you. It didn't go off when I stepped on it going up." And at last, after an exhausting journey through the late mine-laden ditch, the group made contact with Company C, and, excuse me, I need that little bit of water now. Came contact with Company C, 16th Infantry, Wozenski. I landed with 180 men and 8 officers, including me. And I took a head count, and I counted 13 men and 1 other officer. And 1 M1 rifle that would fire, so we put that man on guard, and the rest of us sat down and cleaned our weapons. First echelon maintenance, right on top of those bluff. Those were his words. I read in McManus's book, The Dead and Those Who Are About to Die, these words about Wozenski at that moment. Wozenski was a true leader of men who cared deeply for his soldiers. The sight of Spaulding and the other survivors brought home to the captain the high price his company had paid. Tears filled his eyes. "Where are my men?" he cried rhetorically. "Where are my men?" Later on, Wozenski said, and the actual figures show, I think we had 52 killed, 54 wounded, and some were stragglers that just didn't get the word on the beach. They eventually dragged in, but we lost 2/3 of our company in one fell swoop. Landing time, 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. By mid-afternoon, the Germans had surrendered to the Allies, due in large measure to the selfless courage of the men of the 1st Division. But I do want to read to you the citation that he received, earning him his 2nd Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on Omaha Beach. In his matter-of-fact words, he doesn't tell us what he actually did. Award of the Distinguished Service Cross for D-Day, Captain Edward F. Wozenski, 0351415, 16th Infantry, United States Army, for extraordinary heroism in action against the enemy on 6 June 1944 in France. On D-Day, Captain Wozenski's company suffered numerous casualties in reaching the fire-swept invasion beach. Boldly, he moved along the beach at the risk of his life to reorganize his battered troops. The reorganization completed, he courageously led his men through heavy machine gun fire and small arms fire across the beach and toward an enemy-dominated ridge. Demoralizing fire from a powerful installation on the ridge threatened to stop the attack. Ordering his men to deploy to the flanks of the enemy position, Captain Wozenski, with great valor, advanced alone to within 100 yards of the emplacement. With cool and calm efficiency, he engaged the fortification upon single-handedly with rifle fire to divert attention of the enemy from the flanking movement. Captain Wozenski, with complete disregard for his own safety, continued the harassing fire until his men reached their position safely. His inspired troops charged the strong point vigorously and completely destroyed it, inciting numerous casualties upon the enemy. By his superb leadership and fearless courage, Captain Wozenski exemplified the highest traditions of the armed forces. Courtney H. Hodges, Lieutenant General, U.S. Army, commanding. Now that was the young Captain Wozenski in war. Now I want to return us all today to this very peaceful Memorial Boulevard in introducing Tim Dennehy, treasurer of the Military Museum, and my son. His father, my husband Jack Dennehy, would often visit General Wozenski and his wife Regina in their home. And on one visit, he took our then 13-year-old son Tim, and Tim will now, 44 years later, briefly tell you a little bit about that visit. Tim?
Good afternoon. As your final speaker, I've been asked to take 10 minutes or so to talk with you today about the day that I met General Wozenski. Like nearly every story that I share about a Bristol veteran, it always begins with my father, Jack Dennehy. Dad started the Military Museum in 1976 here in Bristol. He spent the next several decades meeting with Bristol veterans, learning their experience, and then try and document that experience in the museum. And I would often tag along with my father and meet these gentlemen. And I had met veterans from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, dozens of them. Now, I believe the year that I sat with my father with General Wozenski was around 1977. And that's a number of years ago now, 44 to be exact. But I promise you that I remember a surprising amount about the times I sat with Bristol veterans with my father, and on that day that I met General Wozenski. I do recall that in 1977, and that day we were in General Wozenski's home. It was sunny and warm. The general sat to my left and my father sat to my right. And the two of them talked in some length, with my dad asking questions and General Wozenski talking through his World War II experiences in North Africa and Sicily and D-Day. And I recall listening to nearly all of it, and yet at the same time hearing very little of it. Let me explain. I was a 13-year-old boy in 1977, and probably not the sharpest tool in the shed, but like many 13-year-old boys, I tended to fixate on one topic, one thing, one item. Could be sports for a boy or baseball cards. For me, it was my coin collection. And I knew General Wozenski had been in North Africa. And I also knew that the U.S. Treasury had issued a special $1 bill. It actually was a silver certificate back then. And it was easily recognized because it had a yellow seal as opposed to the standard blue seal. And if things had turned out poorly for the Army in North Africa and we didn't know early on, then you could devalue and destroy anything with a yellow seal. Anyway, I also knew that these unique silver certificates were collectible and of some value. So eventually my dad turned to me and he asked if I had any questions for General Wozenski, fully expecting me to inquire about some important element of the earlier conversation. Now, if any one of us could travel back into 1977 and sit with General Wozenski, I'm sure we can come up with at least one good question to ask him about his military experience. So my question, in all my brilliance at 13 years old, was, gee, sir, you were in North Africa. Do you happen to have one of these silver certificates? I'd sure like one for my collection. And I looked to my right. I could see my father shaking his head ever so slightly, and I thought, oh, maybe the wrong question. But to my left, General Wozenski looked at me for a moment and then smiled and said something to the effect, well, maybe. How about I go take a look? And up he goes. And he spends a fair amount of time elsewhere in the house looking for my North Africa silver certificate. And as a wise young lad that I was, I figured he was going through his footlocker carefully, since we all know that every soldier has a footlocker somewhere in his house. But I look back at that moment now as my 57-year-old self. I can't help but be struck by the grace that General Wozenski extended to me at that moment. He could have easily just said, what kind of question is that, or no. But instead he smiled and said, let me look. And exactly what he did. What grace. Well, some 10 minutes later, General Wozenski returned to the living room empty-handed. No North African emergency dollar bill, sorry. And I must have thought that he was going to return with 3 of them. He was, after all, a general. And to his credit, General Wozenski noticed my disappointment. And he did something else that I can clearly see these years later. Probably didn't recognize at that time. He showed kindness. He turned to me and launched into a story that he knew would interest me. Now, everyone here might be familiar with a common Hollywood trope, which is called the money truck or the money bag. And this is where the protagonist, in the midst of the story, in his adventures, stumbles across a truck in the woods, empty, nobody around. The back of it's full of money, or a bag of money sitting unattended somewhere. And the reason why this is such a common Hollywood trope or storyline is because it hooks a lot of people, including about every 13-year-old boy who ever lived. So General Wozenski turns to me and says, I don't have a North Africa emergency silver certificate, but let me tell you about money. And he goes on to describe being with his unit and on patrol, and they were operating somewhere. It was either France or Sicily, I don't recall. And when they came across a larger truck sitting unattended on a side road in the middle of the woods. And they look in the truck and find a number of very large boxes, which upon further inspection are full what appear to be either French francs or Italian lira, but basically, money of the local area. And he explained to me his assumption, along with everyone else who was with him. So this was just a large amount of wartime script of some kind or another, and it was worth less than the value of the paper it was printed on. This is worthless. So they move on. And at that moment, I could see what was coming next, which I'm sure you can too. General Wozenski laughed out loud when he went on to say that a short time later, both he and his troops were rather shocked and dismayed to learn that all that money in that truck was actually of some value and was to be exchanged freely in all the towns and villages that they further went through. He just had me at that. I was like, you left the money truck. You left the money truck in the woods. And I now look back at that today, and I'm just struck by the kindness that General Wozenski extended to me at that moment. Instead of, sorry kid, no dollar bill for you, he went out of his way to tell me a story he knew would hook me. What kindness. So lastly, we come to the point in the meeting where General Wozenski passed along this item, which I happen to have right here. This is a periscope from a German tank. It actually goes this way, and you look through this and it still works. But he passed this item to my father, and it's currently on display at the Military Museum here at the Historical Society. We're all welcome to look at it any time. But General Wozenski passed this item to my father and told my dad how he obtained it. And I recall him looking at me when he said something to the effect, so I knocked this tank out. So I knocked this tank out. But let me tell you how I was able to get the periscope. So I knocked this tank out. Let me put a pin in that for a minute and come back to it. General Wozenski went on to tell us how the tank was sitting in some kind of culvert or depression and was surrounded by high growth, so he knew it would be missed by the folks who swept through afterwards after the battle was over. And this is why I was able to return to the tank shortly thereafter, after the battle, and sure enough, it was sitting somewhat hidden. He was able to climb through it and come away with the periscope. And on that day in 1977, I was really focused on the part of the story that General Wozenski emphasized, which was the recovery of the item, how the tank was hidden just so, etc. But as I look back on it today, I'm struck by the part of the story he did not emphasize. The thing I said put a pin in earlier, his simple and unassuming statement, so I knocked this tank out. If you think about that for just a minute, you recognize the incredible courage it takes for a man with only the protection of the shirt on his back to engage in close quarter with a giant tank and defeat it with a shoulder-mounted weapon. What General Wozenski did when telling the story is walk right past the incredible courage and heroism he exhibited on that day. He walked right past it. And I saw that happen time and time again when I sat with and listened to the veterans of that time with my father. The vast majority of them simply walked past their own courage and bravery and individual deeds with a special kind of modesty. Instead, they were much more willing to talk about the courage and bravery of their comrades and brothers in arms. That is a special kind of modesty. So in closing, as we gather here today to honor General Edward Wozenski, I shared this story of that day, the day I met him in his home, together with my father some 44 years ago, as it is my contention that he was not only a true leader, as described so well by our previous speakers, and not only a man of courage and honor, but on that sunny and warm day in 1977, he was also a man of grace, kindness, and modesty. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Tim. It is the collective hope of both the committee and today's speakers that our tribute has revealed the character, inner strength, and courage that made General Edward Wozenski Bristol's most decorated World War II soldier. Men like the General are not only legends in their own time, but also have rightfully earned a place of honor in our nation's history. We will now have the color guard retire the colors, and that will be followed by a musical finale. Thank you for coming.
Mark time. Hook. Detail. Halt. Left. Pace. Lawyer. Freeze and hook. Two. Lawyer. Wait. Pace. Forward. Hook.
While the storm clouds gather